Sorry about that. Clicked on the wrong button. Okay, so how many people we have here today? 6 people online. So form you into 2 groups and open the groups. And Anais, Micah, and Juyang in group 1, please join the groups. And Chung Du-jin and Cho Jin join group 2. And Lisette, where are you? Juliet, where are you? I don't see you. Okay, Chung Du-jin. Okay, so work with Chung Du-jin and Cho Jin. Is Cho Jin here? So you're get together, the 3 of you. Can you get over there and move and talk to each other? And Anis, Micah, and Shu Young Lee work together and try to decide. Yes. Okay, so can you get into Zoom? Okay. And can you move over there and work with her? And Kim, are you Kim Pyong-koo? So do you want? I'll put you in room 2. Okay, with Chung Du-jin and Kim and Lee's Juliet. Juliet, right? Okay, yeah, okay, that's yours. And so join those groups and decide where your group fits on the scale. That you think the U.S. electoral college system is going to change despite the experience with Donald Trump, despite the attack on January 6, 2001 on the U.S. Capitol. Is the U.S. electoral college system going to change? It's not going to change. You strongly agree it's not going to change. You agree, neutral cannot decide, disagree, strongly disagree. Maybe I should rephrase it this way. The U.S. electoral college system for electing U.S. president is going to change. That's more clear. You agree, strongly disagree. So, who is going to speak for the group? Heads, it's the person on the bottom, and it's heads. So that means that Cho Jin and Lee Ju-young are going to speak for these groups. So Cho Jin for group 2 and Lee Ju-young. Lee Ju-young, please join the group. Anais, please join the group. Help Micah. And decide where you are. Lee Ju-young, where's Lee Ju-young? Lee Ju-young, Lee Ju-young, Kim Pyong-koo. Join the group, Kim Pyong-koo. And I will write a statement as well on the topic. The electoral college system in the U.S. is going to change. Explain your answer so I don't have to decide where I am. So I'll flip a coin. And make sure that you actually can see this. So heads, I am strongly agree or agree. And it's heads. So when I strongly agree, and it's heads again, so I strongly agree that it will change. So I can explain why I think it's going to change because I was reading a sign, so I strongly agree. So talk with each other, discuss, and try to come to a group agreement as to where you are on the scale. Okay? And I strongly agree. 30 seconds. Okay. Okay, so let me tell you what I wrote, because I was assigned to strongly agree with the statement and strongly agree with this statement, because I said, I strongly agree because the US and the world are entering an apocalyptic phase in their development because of climate change and the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. The Republicans are going to take control over the US Congress in November of this year. The Republicans are likely to win control of the House of Representatives and maybe of the Senate. And that will lead to basically non-function. The U.S. government will not be able to pass legislation to address climate change and so on. So there will be an economic recession. There's likely to be an economic recession in the United States because of the high inflation rate and the raising of the interest rates for the by the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank to deal with the high inflation. So we're going to go into economic recession, and that is going to help Donald Trump get reelected to defeat Biden to become the U.S. president again. Then the policies of the Trump presidency will contribute to global and national catastrophes that will lead to the removal of Trump and the reform of the electoral college system to rebuild America and the world, that is, if civilization has not been destroyed by a nuclear war or something along those lines. So in other words, something as traumatic as the American Civil War, for example, that was necessary to change the US Constitution to abolish slavery, will have to happen again in order to abolish the electoral college system. And I'm suggesting that if Donald Trump gets reelected, it's particularly because we're going to go into a recession now that the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates dramatically to deal with high inflation, then Donald Trump is likely to get reelected. And Joe Biden may decide not to run for reelection. Maybe he will run for reelection, but I think this is the scenario that I wrote because I randomly flipped a coin. So I had to write strongly agree. Not that I necessarily agree that this is going to, believe that this is going to happen, but this is the scenario that I think it would happen. So let's see what you had to say. Of course, you chose on your own what you decided, if you could decide as a group. So who's going to speak first? Heads, it's room 1. Tails, it's room 2. And it's heads, so room 1. And so that is, I think, Lee Ju-young. Let me see here. Lee Ju-young. Lee Ju-young. Yeah, Lee Ju-young. So Lee Ju-young, what did your group decide, Lee Ju-young?
Okay, so our group agree with this statement because the U.S. Legal system is also really hard to change, and this electoral system, there's people who are already involved in this system, and they are adapting to this system and using it in their own interest. So even though they have enough power to change this system, we think there is no chance that they're gonna change this.
Oh, so you think it's not going to change?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I did modify this a bit so it's a little clearer. Yeah. It's like something out of a science fiction novel, what I'm considering here, but it's not really science fiction. Okay, and Cho Jin, what did your group decide?
The first idea was that there would be an election system that would fit the American way. And it's also said that the US election system is held twice, which is not going to change easily. Because it's a system that's been in place for a long time and is optimized to elect a president in the United States of America, where there are various cultures. Of course, there's also the opposite. Democracy is based on utilitarian principles, but the US election system doesn't follow that. So we conclude that our group's opinion is difficult to change because there is an American way.
Okay. And, you know, the U.S. Constitution was amended during the Vietnam War, along with the uprisings by African Americans in the civil rights movements, along with the youth movement against the Vietnam War in the 1960s. And a number of constitutional amendments were adopted, including lowering the voting age to 18 from 21 and banning some elements of Jim Crow policies, like forbidding the taxation of voting, which was an attack on Jim Crow policies that tried to keep black people from voting by requiring they pay a vote tax. So that was, of course, a very tumultuous time in the United States. It was during the Vietnam War, during the Cold War. US president had been murdered in 1963, John F. Kennedy. Something along those lines has to happen for the US Constitution to be amended. And I'm afraid it's something that's going to be very stressful and very costly to many people, maybe even deadly. You know, like the Civil War or the Vietnam War or the threat of Cold War. So anyone else here, since you're here in the class today, who else? Does anyone have something to add to this discussion?
Sir, I also think that this electoral college system itself, it's not going to be easily disappear, but just like the Nevada's case that you have mentioned, there would be the attempts to reform it, just like the popular votes, and would be fully considered as a electoral college votes.
Okay. Of course, like I said, in the discussion that I have seen in the media, the claim is that this proposal that we described by, you mentioned Nevada, I have to go back and look at the name of it again, that was been claimed, has not been tested in court. And it's not certain, the claim is that would be accepted, that the Supreme Court would rule, the US Supreme Court would rule that this is actually allowable. That it's, we don't know, but of course we all know that the courts are political actors, and the US Supreme Court apparently right now is preparing to strike down Roe versus Wade that made abortion legal in the United States. So those Supreme Court justices are, 6 of them were appointed by Republicans and 3 of them by Donald Trump. So we could imagine that if this proposal is taken to the US Supreme Court, that the US Supreme Court would rule it unconstitutional, that it somehow violates the laws or the spirit of the US Constitution. We don't know, but you could bet that if this were adopted by enough states to get to 270 votes, that someone, of course, would attempt to take the case to the US federal court system. And so let's go then. Also, something to add?
I thought another opinion.
United States put a lot of importance to the states, and the electoral vote can meaning that United States are putting more important to the each states, and also United States have voting twice. The first can be in citizen to vote electoral, and then electoral vote to president. So, and United States could put a meaning to the first vote that citizens who vote for the electoral can means to voting to the president who like. So, I think it will not change easily, I think.
The people that wrote the U.S. Constitution did not really trust the mass of the population in terms of their wisdom. So electing the U.S. president was sort of somehow like how the Pope is elected, right? That the Pope is chosen by the College of Cardinals, and all the cardinals from France and Korea and United States and Italy and Germany, they all go and they get in a conclave and they decide among themselves who will become Pope. That was the assumption about the electoral college system, that the people would vote for individuals to go from Ohio, New York, Virginia, all of the states, and come together and decide among themselves who should be the president and use their judgment and wisdom to choose to be the president. After that case with Andrew Jackson losing to John Quincy Adams in 1824, with the rise of the demand of the people of the American white men, we're talking about white men, not women, and certainly not African-American enslaved people, to participate directly in the election, when Andrew Jackson, claiming to be the representative of the common white man, the common man, and he won more votes, but was not able to become president because of the bad conspiratorial machinations and tricks of this elite that put John Quincy Adams as president in 1824, that these states, each of these states came under pressure to adopt state laws that required that the Electoral College delegates would choose as president the person who won the most votes in each election in each state for president. So it's by the law of Ohio or the law of Pennsylvania or the law of Texas that the candidate for president who gets the most votes in Texas will get all the electoral college votes. It's not because of the federal government in Washington, D.C. passed such a law. It's been by each of these states passing a law that says that the winner of the presidential election in each of these states gets all the electoral college votes. And there are two states where this does not apply. Nebraska and Maine split their electoral college votes. So if you look, for example, at the election, I think it comes up here in I guess I'll just have to type it in again. You can see here that Nebraska gave 1 electoral college vote to Biden and 4 to Trump. Why? Because Nebraska decided to do it that way. That's just the way Nebraska law allocates its electoral college votes. And another state is Maine. Why? Because that's what Maine decided. So each of these states, the claim is, could each decide to choose a president based upon this. If each state or enough states pass their own laws to require that, if this 270 votes total comes into force here among these states that have approved this, that California would give all of its electoral college votes to the candidate that wins the most votes in the overall popular vote among the voters in the United States. So even if, let's say, California always votes Democratic, they always vote for Democratic for president. In the last 30 years, they have done so. Let's say a Republican gets a majority of the electoral college votes, even though the Democrat lost the electoral college votes, even though the Democrat won the popular vote in California, still California have to give all of its electoral college votes to the Republican because the Republican got a majority of the electoral college votes here. Oh, I'm sorry, a majority of the popular vote. You see, I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to highlight what the problem is here. That you can imagine, like for example, Texas. That's a more likelihood case. That Texas, even if they voted for a Democrat and Joe Biden becomes, or some Democrat, I'm sorry, Texas votes for Republican, but then a Democrat wins most of the popular votes. Texas's election does not determine who gets the vote, the electoral college votes from Texas. So that's the claim how this might not be constitutional. This might be unconstitutional. You understand? And we don't know because it hasn't been tested yet in court. So this might not work. I mean, I can imagine how, Texas always votes Republican. And then they vote for the Republican candidate to become president, but because of Texas law, Texas will never pass such a law anyway. It would be the swing states, the battleground states that might pass such a law. Maybe Minnesota, like Nevada passed that law, but it's still not been signed by the government, the governor evidently. This is Nevada. Those reports I showed you from 2019, they said that the legislature passed it, but it must not have been signed by the governor because it's still not colored green here. So Nevada can swing, but I could imagine how Nevada voters would be very upset. Some would be very upset if all of Nevada's electoral college votes went to a Republican who won the majority of the popular votes, but they voted for a Democrat. This is violation of the will of the people of Nevada, supposedly, something along those lines. So, Juliet, what is your position?
I'm actually same as the rest of the group. I disagree with the statement because there were some attempts to change the way American institutions work and the way the president is elected. And I mean, I feel like Americans aren't ready to give up on their system and they're deeply attached on the way it works. They have confidence in the electoral college. And despite everything that happened in the Capitol, nothing has started to change. So I don't feel like it's going to change soon.
Remember, the United States is supposedly the leader of the free world. The United States, according to Barack Obama, is supposedly the indispensable nation. If you're Xi Jinping in China, you look at this American system, that's supposed to be the leader of the world to deal with climate change, I mean, it elected Trump, and Trump was a fascist. I mean, I'm not just being condemned. He's an authoritarian populist. This is pretty disappointing when you think. The more and more I talk about it, the more and more depressed I get. But it's also very interesting from a political science point of view. So then, let me go now to the vote for this class, and so do you agree it's not going to change? That the political system is not going to change? Please vote. So if you haven't voted already, please vote. And if you think it's not going to change, so the class seems to be pretty much, somebody strongly disagrees that they think it will change. Short of some cataclysm, some catastrophe, I just don't think it's going to change. And that means like the Civil War or the 1960s turmoil something tumultuous has to happen. Will it happen with the overturning of Roe versus Wade? We'll see. If the U.S. Supreme Court does reject Roe versus Wade, my sense is that it's not going to flip the outcome of the election from the control of the Republicans in November. I think the Republicans are probably going to take back the House in November, but I could be wrong. But we'll see. So what happened in 2020? That's the theme of the reading for the rest of the course. This is the reading. So this is in your packet, right? You have the hard copy of this? Do you have the PDF file? Yeah. See, I asked them to send me the PDF file, and I don't think I ever got it. I just noticed. So you have the hard copy of this. And this is, Larry Sabato was the author of your first textbook. And so this covers the 2020 election. And it's been interesting to go through this book, for me to go through this book. It's, of course, an edited volume with a number of different people contributing to the book. These people, I think, all work for Larry Sabato. He's a professor at the University of Virginia. And he has a website called Larry Sabato's Crystal Ball. It has a lot of authority or interest in terms of people looking to it as an authoritative effort at prediction of the outcome of the U.S. presidential election. So let me type that in here. Yeah, the Sabato's crystal, you know what a crystal ball is, right? You look in the future and try to predict from the University of Virginia Center of Politics. So you can click here and go there. I'll post the address on the website. So this is Sabato's crystal ball. So these people, you see Coleman, Kondik, and Sabato are the editors of your volume of the textbook we're using now, and they make predictions about what will happen in the upcoming elections. So for the House, this is what they're predicting. This is from April, a couple weeks ago. Safe Democrat. I don't know. I haven't looked through this yet. But if you look through, what is that? Yeah, they're poll. So I guess we can look through this later. I don't know why this screen came up like that. I don't like that. But so let's look at the notes then, and that I've posted on the website. And, so Donald Trump was highly unusual in terms of his. U.S. President Trump was highly unusual in terms of his abrasiveness and his difference from previous presidents. He was so contemptuous of so many cherished traditions and norms in U.S. politics. So by 2020, much of the U.S. electorate was willing to support a so-called return to normalcy to describe the post-World War I slogan from Warren G. Harding administration. And Harding won the 1920 U.S. election in Lansing, but Harding made little substantive impact historically. So that's where this term comes from. A return to normalcy was the Harding campaign slogan. And Trump was unlike any of his U.S. presidential predecessors. He used his own unique path to become president, and he won tens of millions of devoted U.S. followers. They constituted his so-called base, who tended to view him almost messianically. They support Trump regardless of what he did. They admired him despite the fact that Trump was undeniably authoritarian, demagogic, narcissistic, often untruthful, and ignorant of most of the government's functions. And this man still dominates the Republican Party. Most people who are Republican Party self-identifiers agree with him that the 2020 election was stolen. That fraud, electoral fraud, caused Joe Biden to become president. And we're seeing that Donald Trump continues to dominate the Republican Party in the elections undergoing now in the United States. Trump's election and governance style shook the faith of many domestically and internationally in their faith in the U.S. system of government politics. The U.S. glorified system of checks and balances failed repeatedly to restrain Trump. Part of the explanation for why it failed includes the increasing trends in anti-majoritarian political outcomes in the U.S. due to U.S. constitutional rules, including the Electoral College. Right? The U.S. Electoral College, twice in 16 years, resulted in the selection of a U.S. president who received fewer individual popular votes than his competitors. And you made that point, right? That the defenders of a U.S. system and the Electoral College say we have to defend federalism, that the emphasis on the states is critically important. And, you know, they can give you an argument as to why it is important. Any system has its advantages and disadvantages. The U.S. Senate, representing the states with 2 senators each, heavily overrepresented rural states with little population. So California, with 39 million people, has 2 senators, and Wyoming, with 500,000 people, has 2 senators. Another part of the explanation would be the extreme polarization between Democrats and Republicans. Their polarization led to increasing distaste towards each other. It nearly eliminated any willingness for cross-party collaboration in the U.S. Congress. So it's extremely difficult, even more difficult, to get legislation through the U.S. Congress unless one party overwhelmingly dominates the House, the Senate, and controls the presidency. It made utilizing the 25th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which was ratified in 1967, as a way to remove a dangerous or incapable president. It wasn't intended to be a way by which to remove a sitting, breathing president. It was what happens if a president gets sick and can't resign. President doesn't die, but let's say a president has a stroke and becomes comatose. They're not dead, so they can't resign. How do you replace that person? That's what this was intended for. How do you, replace a president who is incapacitated and can't quit? So there was talk about using it, however, to get rid of Trump, to have his cabinet declare that this man is insane and he needs to go. And then, of course, the Congress would then have to approve the removal by a simple majority vote of both houses. It was originally a technocratic change to the Constitution that nobody really paid much attention to. But then it became a topic of conversation a few years ago. Trump's tendencies might have been reinforced if Trump had won a second term. Many observers thought Trump had at least a 50% chance of being reelected because the economy was doing well and the U.S. was not involved in full-scale military campaigns. Again, were it not for the pandemic, I don't think he would have lost. I can't be certain, but he probably would have won. And some people claim if he had won, the United States, for example, would have withdrawn from NATO by the end of its second term. The Trump administration was demanding also that South Korea pay 5 times the amount of money it pays every year to the U.S. for American military base costs in South Korea. That the Trump administration wanted it increased 5 times, from $1 billion a year to $5 billion a year. So South Korea and the United States were in hostile negotiations about the American military bases here in South Korea. That stopped, of course, after Trump lost. The COVID-19 pandemic public health crisis resulted in Trump's serious mismanagement of it. Trump denied publicly that the disease was very serious. He made statements about treating it with bleach and unproven medications and incoming spring weather. And the U.S. death toll turned out to be much higher than it turned out to be, than it had to be. And the advent of vaccines did not occur until after the election. So the second 2020 election-changing development was the nomination of former Vice President Joe Biden as the Democratic presidential nominee. He's attempted to win the presidency for 30 years. He was the safest choice to counter Trump. He has served the U.S. Senate for 36 years, and 8 years as Obama's vice president. Ideologically, he evolved over his career. He's a moderate liberal, and his rhetoric was more mild than his nominee contenders. The campaign went virtual because of the pandemic. Thus, the chances for the 77-year-old candidate would make verbal gaffes, which he has a reputation of doing. He turned 78 just after the election. Trump was was 74. So the question is Biden going to run for re-election? I mean, he'll be 82 if he wins. And he has said he probably will run for re-election. Trump, of course, has not said he's running for re-election, but he's giving all these indications that he's going to run for re-election. The largest proportion of eligible voters participating in the 2020 election, about 67%. That's the largest percentage of eligible voters participating in a U.S. presidential election in 120 years. Typically, election turnout is close to 50%. It was the first election to be held in the midst of a once-in-a-century pandemic. In 1990, basically only white men were actually permitted to vote. 1890, sorry. In 2020, 158 million Americans voted. 137 million voted in the 2016 election. Some of the increase occurred in part because voting behavior became easier due to liberalization of voting laws. Early voting was expanded, as was the use of absentee ballots. 46% of all votes cast in 2020 came through the mail or absentee ballot. So that's how I voted. I voted. It was 21% in 2016. Early in-person voting has also expanded from 19% of all votes cast in 2016 to 26% in 2020. So since the 2020 election, Republicans at the state level are changing the electoral laws in each of these states to reduce the ease of access to voting, to make it more limited in terms of the opportunities to vote through absentee ballots, to vote early, claiming that they're trying to fight against voter fraud, even though there's astronomically little amount of voter fraud has ever occurred in the U.S. election. For the first time, less than half of all votes cast on November 3rd, 2020 election day were less than half of the total votes cast. So most of the votes were cast before November 3rd, 2020. In 2016, 60% of all votes cast were cast on election day, but only 28% were cast on November 3rd, 2020. So these practices will probably not continue without the pandemic continuing. The pandemic is continuing. However, many Americans probably enjoy the convenience of voting by absentee ballot through the mail. The large Republican and Democratic national conventions in the summer before November 3rd, 2020 were quadrennial, every 4-year feature where Republicans were held as virtual events for the first time. Campaigns were also virtual, although Trump did hold his large rallies without social distancing and mask requirements. And some of these event-live rallies became super spreader events for the virus. The results of the election were clearly for Biden, but the relative slowness of the complete vote count gave Trump a public opening to claim that the vote was altered through massive fraud that otherwise would not have resulted in a landslide victory for him. It was utter nonsense, a monstrous lie, continues to haunt the country. That's Sabato, Condit, and Coleman, Steve. These are political scientists. This is just bullshit. But the majority of Republicans absolutely believe it. And as I said, he continues to dominate the Republican Party in the primary elections that are now underway. For example, the candidate who is going to be the Republican Party nominee for U.S. Senator from Ohio was somebody who was third in the polls until Trump endorsed him, J.D. Vance. And then Trump endorsed him, and he won. He endorsed him a month before the election, and he came from behind and he won, and defeated everybody else by a big majority. Trump has continually repeated this lie, and millions of his followers believe him. Dozens of members of the U.S. Congress also repeated Trump's false claims. They attempted everything possible to slow or stop the Electoral College vote counting on January 6, 2021. An angry U.S. pro-Trump mob stormed U.S. Capitol and interrupted the formal vote counting. The attempt failed. Several people died. It nevertheless established a dangerous precedent. Future losers of elections will use this event to their own political advantage to delegitimize their opponent's victory. Let me go on to highlight here. In fact, Biden Biden switched the three so-called blue wall states, pro-democratic states, that had voted for Trump in 2016, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Biden also added Arizona and Georgia to the Democratic win. Trump did not gain any of the U.S. states he lost in the 2016 election. Trump did lose the 5 states noted above to Biden, which he had won in 2016. Biden in 2020 also carried Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. That's why Nebraska divides up its electoral college votes according to Nebraska's own law. It is a standalone district that Trump won in 2016. Nebraska and Maine are the only 2 states that divide their electoral college votes proportionally. The other 48 states and District of Columbia awarded their electoral college votes according to the winner-take-all system. So Biden in 2020 won 306 electoral college votes, which was the same number that Trump won in 2016. In 2020, Trump won 232 electoral college votes. In 2016, Trump lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton by almost 3 million votes. In 2020, Biden won more than 7 million votes than Trump. Biden won 4.5% of the popular vote more than Trump, 51.3% to 46.8%. It was the highest percentage of the popular vote to vote. I'm sorry, it was the highest percentage of the popular vote to win since Lyndon Johnson won in '64, with the exception of Barack Obama, who won 52.9% in 2008. So it's typically not common for the winner of the U.S. popular vote to win a majority of the votes, of the popular votes. Like, I mean, if you look, for example, at when Bill Clinton was president, the husband of Hillary Clinton, he won 43% of the vote. He did not get 51%. George H.W. Bush got 37%, and this person got 19%. So it's not typical, even for the winner of the U.S. election who wins the electoral college vote, even to win a majority of the popular votes. Landslides, that's an American slang term, that is winning 55 or more percent are no longer politically possible due to more intense partisanship in the United States. America has become much more polarized, much more partisan over my lifetime. Political observers argue endlessly about how close Biden came to losing the electoral college vote in 2020. Trump won the electoral college in 2016 by a mere 77,000 votes, in total distributed among the 3 so-called blue wall states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Biden won the electoral college by 43,000 total votes in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin. If Biden had lost these 3 states to Trump, then the electoral college totals would have been tied at 269 and 269. In this case, according to the U.S. Constitution, the election would have been decided by the U.S. House of Representatives and the Congress. The only time it's been done is 1824. According to these rules, each state delegation of the House gets 1 vote, regardless of the size of the population of each state. Each state delegation to the U.S. House would decide how the state would vote, and since Republicans have more majorities in each U.S. House state delegation, the outcome would have been in favor of Trump because he would have received at least 26 votes out of the 50. It says that this how can happen. It happened also in 1800, okay, 1824, a long time ago. Critics have portrayed this situation as again highlighting the unfairness of the anti-majoritarian electoral college in the U.S. Constitution. It clearly favors Republican presidential candidates in close elections. Biden nearly lost the election despite receiving more than 7 million votes than Trump in 2020. U.S. Constitution reform should be on the agenda, but it is not. In public opinion surveys, Trump never achieved the majority support during his presidency. Trump did manage to increase his popular vote total from 63 million in 2016 to 74.2 million in 2020. Hillary Clinton received 65.8 million votes in 2016. Biden received 81.3 million in 2020. Biden benefited from the decline in popular votes for independent and third-party presidential candidates. So that's important because if Biden has a hope of winning in 2024, those independent voters have to stay with him. But as I said, you might say, well, they know Trump is a problem, so they won't vote for him. But we're going into recession. We're probably going into a recession by 2024. So the economy will be poor. In 2016, 8.5 million votes, or 60% voted for independent or third-party presidential candidates. In 2020, only 3 million, or 1.9%, voted for independent or third-party presidential candidates. Trump received far more votes in 2020 than he received in 2016, but his percentage of the popular vote barely changed. 45.9% in 2016 and 46.8% in 2020. Biden won almost 3% more of the popular vote in 2020 than Hillary Clinton in 2016. Still, Biden, Democratic candidate, barely beat Trump in the electoral college results. So the U.S. regional differences in voting patterns remained predictable in 2020, aside from the shift of a few states in 2020. As expected, the South, the Plains, and the Interior West voted for Trump. The Northeast and the Pacific Northwest were strongly for Biden. Only the industrial Midwest was truly competitive. Biden won 49.6% of the vote, Trump won 48.5% of the vote. So in sum, the 2020 election was a rerun of the 2016 election. Biden did marginally better than Clinton in many states. Trump lagged in his performance slightly. In some, marginal changes make all the difference in the very polarized U.S. political environment. They determine whether a Democrat or Republican gains 306 electoral college votes in 2016 or 2020. Okay, so let's see what else I have lined up here. So what's going to happen this 2020 general election coming up in November? Of course, there's been a lot of discussion about the leak of that document from the U.S. Supreme Court indicating that next month, the U.S. Supreme Court is going to overturn Roe versus Wade. And this professor at the University of Bath in England makes a comment about how this is a lot less controversial. Abortion is a lot less controversial in Europe than it is in the United States. She says that Jennifer Thompson, a lecturer at the University of Bath who has studied abortion, said that for the most part, this issue was more settled in Western Europe. And that was what was happening in the US. And what was happening in the US was linked to a specific legal political system in which the Supreme Court is the ultimate interpreter of the law. We just don't see that type of political debates around abortion in most Western European countries, she said. This is just not the appetite, there's just not the appetite for it among the broader population, which is an interesting comment. And other people have noted that as well, that Americans are utopian moralists, whereas Europeans are more likely to view the state as playing a leading role, and a proper leading role in American society. The Americans are hesitant or reject the role of the state in overturning the authority of evangelical religious leaders. So you can see lots of protests that are ongoing here. And we'll see what impact it will have in November. But my concern is that many people who are like you and me pay close attention. We care more about this issue than most people in the United States. You see, these people are protesting, demanding the protection of legal abortion access, lots of statements and the like. But most people in the United States don't pay close attention to politics. And so you can see Lots of journalist reports, protests going on now against what the Supreme Court is likely to do next month. And abortion will not become illegal everywhere. It's just that a number of states will make it illegal. We showed that in a previous class about the states that are likely to make abortion illegal, but other states like New York and Pennsylvania and California will not make abortion illegal. So that would be one way by which people would explain it away, that, well, you know, you can go to Pennsylvania if you need to get an abortion, or New York or California. But of course, the issue is poor people. Most people who get abortions are poor. I think one interviewee said that 75% of the people that come into their clinic to get abortions are poor. And America is a country that doesn't have a high opinion of poor people. We talked about that at the beginning of the semester. So, how can we make sense of this? This is again from that book, that textbook on Introduction to Political Science, to cover how members of the public pay attention to or process political information. And maybe some of the most basic information is the differing degrees to which people pay attention. The kind of people that read the New York Times or that take this class with me in this university, we tend to be the people that are very attentive to politics. But most people don't pay close attention to politics at all. Maybe 1% of the population in the United States could pass a current events test, right? 5% or 6% of the US population is attentive to politics. Another 15%, they're moderately attentive. They might look at the news, read the front page of a newspaper, and then go look at the sports or the fashion reports. 35% of the population doesn't pay attention to news much at all. And these people basically don't pay attention at all to US politics. At most, they get a little television news. And that's something to keep in mind. We're viewing these news reports of all these protesters coming out, protesting against the overturning of Roe versus Wade. But this is a very small section of the American population is attentive to politics. And that's why the state of the economy will probably determine who controls the presidency in 2024. Like I said, if the pandemic had not come in 2020, Trump probably would have been reelected, despite all the bad things he supposedly did. He probably would have won reelection because the economy was strong. Then the economy went into deep recession with the pandemic and the social distancing and lockdowns, and Trump lost. But without the pandemic, I think he would have won. And this study of the American voter, this became a big topic, particularly after the Second World War. To make sense of how people vote in elections became a big focus of study in the second half of the 20th century. Public opinion polling, Harris, Gallup, all of those organizations, they have affiliates also here in Korea and other countries. Those emerged after the Second World War. And they're cited tremendously in your book that you're using for the rest of the semester. But that's something that became popular after the 1930s, going into the 1940s. And one of the important books that covers this is this book, The American Voter. which hopefully this will come up. Maybe it won't because the book, oh yeah, this book. And this book was published not long after the Second World War. And of course I lost it. Where did it go? No. And this book really demonstrated that the American voter is not the defender of American democracy as a whole. Remember during World War II, the United States is fighting against fascism and claiming that the American political system is fighting for democracy, for freedom, against the evil Nazi and fascist regimes that disdained democracy and viewed democratic politics as a waste of time. And then the Second World War is done, and then the Cold War comes. And the communist system in Moscow is compared with the American system. And again, the United States is in a global conflict, a so-called Cold War, because of nuclear weapons being a facet of this conflict between the communist Soviet Union and the United States and its allies. And this book began to challenge, actually analyze, how do American voters, this foundation of the democratic political system, how much do they pay attention? What do they know about politics? And that's when this book revealed or proved, provided evidence of this, right? That most Americans are grossly unaware of what's going on. If they vote out of habit, and they vote for political parties as the most important factor, regardless of the kind of characteristics of the candidate. And let me see, make sure you're able to see this. So this is pretty melancholy and troublesome from the perspective of democratic theory, right? The idea is that voters take seriously their obligations to vote, that they study the issues, they pay attention to current affairs, they try to educate themselves in terms of how to vote. And so this was from 1964, and American mass public has very simple belief systems compared to the people that are attentive, the political elite, who pay closer attention to politics. So among members of the mass public, only about 15% have substantial constraint knowledge in their political system, in their belief systems. At lower levels, most people are politically ignorant about the complexities and the issues concerning current affairs. And this book has generated a tremendous amount of controversy ever since. Are people really like children, for the most part, in terms of how they evaluate political candidates? And so there's been a great degree of conflict and controversy regarding this book. But this analysis came out of the University of Michigan. Those professors in that of that book that wrote that textbook, they tend to be, they were concentrated at the University of Michigan. So the University of Michigan has been the center, one of the centers for the study of what's called micropolitics. How do American voters decide if and how to vote? What's going on in their brains? And that was really established by this textbook. And this is the foundation of work in public opinion polling, and therefore in shaping political campaigns, in giving advice to candidates. How do you win elections? What do you have to do? What do you have to say to win elections, given what we know about the American voter? And let's go back to the notes. I'm sorry, I have to find the right notes. I think you can see that. Make sure you can see it. And so this is the study of what's called micropolitics. What's going on in the heads of individual voters, noting that they have ways by which they evaluate candidates in terms of knowledge, but also important is emotion, affective orientations, the cognitive orientations, their affective orientations, and their evaluative orientations when they actually have to make a decision as to how they're going to vote, evaluate a candidate to vote in the election. So this is, all evidence of this is evident in the book that you're going to be using for the rest of the semester. Because, of course, Larry Sabato and his crystal ball is all about analyzing voting behavior. The focus is upon belief systems that people have in their brains, certain fundamental assumptions that they have regarding how the political world functions. It doesn't matter if it's true or not, it's just there. And it guides a person as she organizes her existing political knowledge and processes new information in order to establish an opinion on a particular subject. And they use a voter uses their cognitive, affective, and evaluative orientations in this process. Keeping in mind that most of the time, most people don't focus a lot on politics, but they may feel, well, I have to vote in the elections, and they have to make a decision. If Trump gets any kind of credit for anything, he gets credit for increasing interest in elections by the American voters. I mean, again, 67% of eligible voters voted, the highest in 120 years. And that's because of Trump. Okay, I have to close this Zoom session to open up my laptop. So let me do that.